Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
Glad to be here for this one because we are jumping into something pretty intense today.
We really are. So picture this. 2,000 years ago, the most powerful men in the world were told that to become truly rich, they didn't need a single coin added to their vaults.
Right. They actually needed their desires violently subtracted, which is, it's a jarring reality to confront.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Especially when our entire modern metric for success is built on, pure accumulation. More money, more status, more followers, more life hacks.
More of everything.
Exactly. Yeah. But today, we are pulling you into a space that completely shatters that metric. We're doing a deep dive into Volume 1, the first 21 chapters of Seneca's moral letters to Lucilius.
And I just have to say, these letters are arguably one of the most profound collections of philosophical thought ever recorded, mostly because they were never meant to be dry academic treatises sitting in some dusty library.
Right, they aren't textbooks.
Not at all. They are deeply intimate, incredibly urgent letters from an older, weathered mentor, Seneca, to his younger friend, Lucilius. Seneca isn't just theorizing about the human mind here. He's basically performing emergency triage on it.
Emergency triage. I love that. And that's the mission for our deep dive today. We want to act as your thoughtful guides through this stack of correspondence.
Yeah, we're going to extract the practical wisdom and the actual life application from it.
Because the murky, anxiety-inducing landscape Seneca was diagnosing in ancient Rome, it's the exact same landscape you are navigating right now. The technology has changed, obviously, but the human operating system, that hasn't changed a bit.
It really hasn't. And to navigate this today, we're going to look at this through a few specific lenses. We'll explore the core wisdom, the historical context, how to translate it for today, the practical how-tos, the obstacles, where we need some discernment, and finally, some comparative insights.
That's the blueprint. So let's jump right into the core wisdom. Because to understand anything Seneca is arguing, we have to grapple with his foundational architecture of the mind.
Right.
Starting with his radical redefinition of what you and I actually own.
He lays this out in the very first letter, chapter 1. It's a fundamental assertion that honestly demands a complete psychological reset. He tells Lucilius that time is the singular, exclusive thing we truly possess.
Just time. Nothing else.
Exactly. Everything else you think you own, like your house, your career status, your reputation, your physical stuff, it's merely on loan from fortune. It can all be repossessed in an instant. But nature has entrusted you with the ownership of this one fleeting, slippery commodity, which is time.
He writes, nothing Lucilius is ours except time. And he immediately points out the wild hypocrisy in how we manage our ledgers. Think about your own bank account.
Oh, yeah, the financial analogy is perfect.
Right. If someone hacks your debit card for $50, you are immediately on the phone with fraud protection. You're disputing the charge. You're locking the card down. We guard our financial property fiercely.
We do. We panic over $50.
But when it comes to time, we let absolutely anyone steal it. We sit in pointless 2-hour meetings. We let energy vampires drain our entire afternoon.
Seneca observes that exact thing. He says people never regard themselves as in debt when they've received someone else's time. Even though time is the one loan which even the most grateful recipient can never repay, you literally can't give it back.
Wow. Yeah, you can't refund an hour.
No, you can't. And the Roman world was obsessed with accounting, with strict ledgers of debts and credits. So Seneca is borrowing that financial language to point out a moral bankruptcy.
And he categorizes this loss brutally.
He does. He says a large portion of our life passes while we are doing ill, a goodly share while we are doing nothing, and the entirety of our lives while we are doing that which is not to the purpose.
That forces a really uncomfortable personal audit. Are you doing ill? Are you doing nothing? Or are you just doing things that are entirely beside the point of your existence?
Most of us are doing things beside the point.
Yeah, definitely. And this actually leads to an idea about death that completely flipped my brain upside down when I read it.
Oh, the perspective on the past.
Yes. If I asked you right now to picture death, you almost certainly picture an event waiting for you in the future.
Right.
Like a finish line you haven't crossed yet.
Yeah, our default psychological posture is to place death strictly ahead of us, somewhere down the road.
But Seneca shatters that. He says, and I'm quoting here, We are mistaken when we look forward to death. The major portion of death has already passed. Whatever years lie behind us are in death's hands.
It's incredible. And the psychological mechanism behind that shift is profoundly liberating, actually.
How so? Because at first it sounds kind of morbid.
Well, think about it. If the past is already dead, it means the present moment is the only living, breathing thing you actually possess. You are actively dying daily. The years of your 20s, your 30s, or whatever you were a decade ago, those belong to death now. They're gone.
So death already owns them.
Right. Therefore, if you hold every hour in your grasp today, if you lay hold of today's task, you won't need to depend so much upon tomorrow's.
While we are postponing, life speeds by.
I am.
Of that. So if time is our only true possession, our traditional metric for wealth, the accumulation of stuff, is a total illusion.
A complete illusion. And in chapters 2 and 21, he completely redefines what it means to be wealthy.
Because the modern view of wealth is entirely additive. You get a raise, you buy a bigger house, you acquire more stock, boom, you are considered wealthier.
But Seneca introduces a subtractive formula for wealth. He famously says contented poverty is an honorable estate. He clarifies that it's not the individual who has too little, but the individual who craves more, who is truly impoverished.
He gives this incredibly specific advice regarding a man named Pythocles in chapter 21. He says, if you wish to make Pythocles rich, do not add to his store of money, but subtract from his desires.
It's such a brilliant inversion of economics.
It really is. If you want to make someone honorable, don't pile honors onto them. Just subtract from their craving for recognition.
Because you can try to reach the destination of enough by endlessly accumulating, right? But that's mathematically impossible. Human desires scale infinitely with income. You make more, you want more.
The hedonic treadmill.
Exactly. Or you can just lower the ceiling of your desires to meet what you already possess.
But lowering that ceiling requires a massive shift in how you operate internally. It demands an absolute alignment of your word and your deed.
And for Seneca, philosophy is not a parlor game. He states this explicitly in chapter 16. It's not a trick to catch the public, nor is it devised for show. It is the helm of the ship.
The helm of the ship.
Yes. It directs your course as you waver amid uncertainties. It's the navigational instrument, not just, the paint on the hull to make the ship look pretty.
In chapter 20, he demands that our inner life be of one hue with our outer activities. We must always desire and refuse the same things. It reminds me a lot of the modern self-help landscape.
Oh, how so?
Well, you see, individuals with these beautifully curated social media feeds dedicated to the aesthetics of minimalism, white walls, one single plant.
Right.
But if you look at their actual credit card statements, or if you open their real-life closets, it's overflowing with impulse buys and chaotic consumption. They speak the language of simplicity, but their deeds are pure accumulation.
Seneca is targeting that exact dissonance. He considers it the highest proof of wisdom that deed and word should be in accord. You cannot preach restriction in your private journals, but then strut with a swelling port before the public.
Yeah, that discordance just shows a wavering mind. You have to decide what you wish and actually persist in it.
So we have this intense foundation, right? Time is our only real asset. True wealth is the absence of desire, and our actions must match our philosophy.
But to genuinely understand why Seneca is so aggressively focused on protecting the mind with these specific rules, we have to look at the historical and human context, the brutal reality of the world he was writing from.
Yeah, we really need to set the scene here.
Because we often romanticize ancient Rome as this serene landscape of white marble columns, with men in togas having calm, polite debates. But the noise of ancient Rome was deafening, it was chaotic, and incredibly violent.
The historical context is vital here because Rome was an apex predator society. Chapter 7 is perhaps one of the most intense and famous passages in this entire collection because it strips away that romantic marble veneer completely.
Yeah, Seneca recounts to Lucilius a time he went to the midday gladiatorial games.
And we really need to explain what that actually meant to a Roman. He didn't go to the main event. He went expecting a break.
Right, like an intermission.
Exactly. Some fun, some wit, a little relaxation during the intermission between the morning beast hunts and the afternoon professional gladiatorial bouts. He expected a palate cleanser.
But instead, what he witnessed was absolute carnage. The midday shows were often executions, right? Specifically ad bestias or forced mutual combat among the condemned.
Yes. He describes it as pure murder. Men are thrown into the arena with absolutely no defensive armor, no helmets, no shields, just exposed chests. They are forced to butcher each other, and the crowd in the stands is screaming for blood.
He actually quotes the crowd chanting. They're yelling, "Kill him, lash him, burn him. Why does he die so game?"
It's horrific. And the visceral horror of that scene serves a dual purpose for Seneca. Yes, it's a literal warning about the depravity of the arena, but more importantly, it is a psychological warning about the mob, the toxic nature of crowd mentality.
Right, because you think you're just watching, but you're absorbing it.
Precisely. He observes that consorting with the crowd is dangerous because vice steals subtly upon us through the avenue of pleasure. You sit in that amphitheater, you absorb their cruelty just through proximity. He notes that you return home more greedy, more ambitious, more voluptuous, and more cruel simply because you have been among human beings.
It's the ultimate form of peer pressure. He says even someone with the iron virtue of a Socrates could be shaken by the sheer kinetic energy of a bloodthirsty mob.
And that danger wasn't confined to just the literal arena. The political arena was just as lethal. The peril of power and prosperity in Rome was a constant shadow.
We see this political dread really manifest in chapters 4, 14, and 19. Seneca reminds Lucilius of the sudden, violent fates of Pompey, Crassus, and Caesar.
These were the triumvirs. They were, without exaggeration, the most powerful men on the planet at one point.
Yeah, Pompey conquered the East and amassed unimaginable wealth. Yet his fate was settled by a boy king and a eunuch on a beach in Egypt.
And Crassus, the richest man in Rome, was destroyed by Parthian archers. Allegedly, he had molten gold poured down his throat to mock his greed.
And Caesar, the dictator for life, was stabbed to death by his own friends in the Senate.
So Seneca uses these towering historical figures as proof that fortune threatens those she indulges most. He writes, "No man has ever been so far advanced by fortune that she did not threaten him as greatly as she had previously indulged him."
And he's writing this warning specifically to Lucilius, who is not a nobody.
No, Lucilius is a procurator. To give that some context, a procurator was a senior financial official, basically an agent of the emperor. In Lucilius's case, he was operating in Sicily.
So he's managing vast sums of money, grain supplies, taxes.
Exactly. He was lured by renown, surrounded by a crowded household of clients seeking his political favor. He was climbing the very ladder Seneca is warning him about.
Seneca actually quotes Maecenas, who was the ultimate political fixer for the first emperor, Augustus. Maecenas famously said, "There is thunder even on the loftiest peaks."
The higher you climb the social and political hierarchy, the more you become a lightning rod for betrayal, envy, and literal assassination.
Okay, but I have to push back on Seneca right here.
Let's hear it.
I read this and couldn't help but feel a massive wave of irony. I mean, Seneca is advising his friend to step back from public life, to avoid the lofty peaks. Yet Seneca himself is writing these letters as a man living in the most dangerous, highest echelon of Roman power imaginable. He was the tutor, the speechwriter, and the chief advisor to the Emperor Nero.
Yeah, that is the elephant in the room.
Is he just a massive hypocrite, preaching poverty while living in a palace? Or is this the ultimate insider's warning?
That tension is the central paradox of Seneca's life, and historians have debated it fiercely. Some definitely view him as a classic hypocrite who amassed a vast fortune through imperial favor while writing essays on the virtues of poverty.
It's a bad look.
It is. However, a more psychologically nuanced reading views these letters as a desperate, urgent transmission from a man trapped inside a burning building.
Oh, burning building.
Yeah. He is standing on that lofty peak, surrounded by the thunder of Nero's increasing paranoia and madness, shouting down to Lucilius, "Do not come up here. The view is not worth the terror." He knows intimately that prosperity is not only greedy, but exposed to the greed of others.
The lime twigs of fortune's favor. He knows it's a trap because he's caught in it.
Exactly.
And when you strip away the Roman specificities, the togas, the gladiators, the emperors, that ancient noise sounds exactly like the digital and cultural noise we face today.
It really does.
The crowd screaming for destruction, the hustle for status, the distractions of the elite. This text translates flawlessly into the 21st century, which brings us to the modern translation part of our deep dive.
The parallels are almost eerie. Consider Chapter 2. Where Seneca warns Lucilius against what he calls discursiveness in reading.
Discursiveness in reading.
Yeah, he observes that dipping into a multitude of authors and books of every sort makes the mind unsteady. He argues that you must linger among a limited number of master thinkers and digest their works if you want to extract ideas that will actually take root in your soul. Everywhere means nowhere, he concludes.
When I read everywhere means nowhere,
Yeah.
I immediately visualized a modern web browser with 50 tabs open.
Yes, the perfect analogy.
You're doom scrolling. You read a fragmented thought on politics, immediately swipe to a 15-second video of a recipe, glance at an email from your boss, and then read a headline about a natural disaster.
And your brain is just spinning.
You are consuming massive volumes of information, but the velocity is so high that you aren't digesting a single calorie of actual knowledge. You are mentally everywhere, which means your focus and your presence are nowhere.
The neurochemistry of that modern behavior aligns perfectly with Seneca's ancient critique. We prize the novelty and velocity of information over the depth of understanding. Seneca uses biological metaphors for this. He says food does no good if it leaves the stomach as soon as it is eaten. A plant that is frequently transplanted can never grow strong.
You need time to set roots.
Right. So he is advocating for deep, sustained reading. He advises Lucilius to acquire something each day that will fortify him against poverty or death. And after running over many thoughts, to select one to be thoroughly digested that day.
Stop snacking on algorithmic junk food and sit down for a deeply nutritious meal with a single master thinker.
Precisely.
And it's not just how we consume information that he challenges, it's how we consume human beings. In chapters 3 and 9, he draws a sharp contrast between genuine friendship and what we today would call networking.
Oh, this is a huge one. In chapter 3, he critiques the casual dilution of the word friend. He notes that people call mere acquaintances friends, just as political candidates call voters honorable gentlemen.
Right, it's empty flattery for utility.
Exactly. He establishes a strict boundary. He says if you consider any man a friend whom you do not trust completely as you trust yourself, you are fundamentally misunderstanding the concept. You must deliberate before forming the bond, but once formed, you must trust without reservation.
But chapter 9 introduces a really fascinating philosophical hurdle here. Seneca is a Stoic, right? And the ultimate goal of the Stoic sage is complete self-sufficiency.
Yes, apatheia.
He says the wise man can lose an eye or a hand or his entire estate and remain perfectly content finding joy in his impaired body. But if the Stoic is totally self-sufficient, why on earth would he want friends?
That's a great question.
Because modern networking is built entirely on the premise of utility. Like, I connect with you on LinkedIn so you can introduce me to a hiring manager. I want a friend so someone will pick me up from the airport or sit by my sickbed.
Seneca vehemently rejects utility as the foundation of friendship. He calls those fair weather friendships. If someone is attracted to you by a potential reward, they will cease to be a friend the moment the reward vanishes or a better offer comes along.
Makes sense.
So the self-sufficient wise man seeks friends not for what he can extract from them, but for the opportunity to exercise his own noble qualities.
And his answer to why the wise man wants a friend is just breathtaking. He says, in order to have someone for whom I may die, whom I may follow into exile, against whose death I may stake my own life.
It is the complete inversion of our transactional culture. He doesn't want a friend to die for him. He wants a friend so he has an avenue to express supreme virtue and self-sacrifice.
Contrast that profound depth with the profound loneliness of the modern era. We are blockaded by thousands of digital connections and followers, yet entirely isolated because the foundational motive of those connections is utility, not genuine affection.
That critique cuts incredibly deep today. And speaking of modern culture, we also have to look at how Seneca absolutely roasts the ancient equivalent of hustle culture and fitness obsessives in chapters 13 and 15.
Oh my gosh, the way he mocks the gym bros of Rome in chapter 15 is hilarious.
It really is.
He tells Lucilius, it is downright foolish for a cultivated man to spend his hours developing bulging muscles and broadening his shoulders.
He points out the absurdity of dedicating your life to physical strength, noting that no matter how much you lift, you will never be a match in weight or strength for a first-class bull.
You're not going to beat a bull.
No. And he paints a pathetic picture of their lifestyle. Heavy eating that dulls the cognitive faculties, massive drafts of liquor to replace the sweat, and spending hours taking orders from the slaves who manage the oil flasks in the gymnasium.
I just picture the modern executive who spends 4 hours a day optimizing his macros, cold plunging, and tracking his sleep data on a smart ring, but hasn't read a book that challenged his worldview in a decade.
That's exactly it. Seneca is saying, yes, keep the body healthy, run, jump, do short exercises that tire the body rapidly, but then get immediately back to the mind. The mind is where your actual life occurs.
And that neglect of the mind ties directly into the ultimate modern disease he diagnoses in Chapter 13, the constant deferral of living.
He states, "The fool, with all his other faults, has this also. He is always getting ready to live."
Always getting ready to live. I mean, if that isn't the mission statement of modern hustle culture, I don't know what is.
Right.
We grind through our 20s to establish the career. We grind through our 30s to pay the mortgage. We grind through our 40s to build the retirement portfolio. We are endlessly laying down the scaffolding for a life we plan to live someday.
And Seneca asks, what is more tragic than getting ready to live when you are already old?
Exactly. So recognizing this noise, the information gluttony, the transactional relationships, the perpetual deferral of life, that's merely the diagnostic phase.
We need a treatment plan.
Right. And the genius of these letters is that Seneca immediately transitions into physical therapy. He prescribes a highly practical, actionable training regimen to fortify your mind against these specific vulnerabilities.
So let's break down those practical how-tos, starting with one of the most famous Stoic exercises found in chapters 18 and 20, the practice of poverty.
Let's set the scene for Chapter 18. It is the month of December. The festival of Saturnalia is in full swing across Rome.
Which was a massive deal.
Huge. It was a period of intense public partying, luxury, and a temporary inversion of social roles, where slaves feasted and masters served them. Everyone is indulging, and Seneca tells Lucilius that this is the precise moment to test the fortitude of his mind.
Right in the middle of the party.
Yes, he advises him to set aside a few days to be content with the scantiest, cheapest fare and to wear coarse, rough clothing.
He instructs him to eat hard, grimy bread, to sleep on a literal pallet on the floor, and while doing this, to look around and ask himself, is this the condition that I feared?
And the mechanism at play here is exposure therapy, right?
Exactly. It is a calculated inoculation against the fear of loss. If you rehearse poverty during a time of profound peace and prosperity, you establish a psychological baseline.
You prove to your nervous system that your peace of mind does not depend on fortune's luxuries.
You realize that even when fortune turns hostile, she leaves enough behind to satisfy our basic biological needs.
I see the logic, I really do. But how do we execute this today without it turning into performative poverty tourism?
That's a valid concern.
Because you see these tech billionaires doing 3-day water fasts or sleeping in a sleeping bag under their standing desk to feel grounded before driving their sports car back to their mansion. It feels insulting to people experiencing actual poverty.
Seneca actually anticipates that exact critique in the text. He explicitly warns Lucilius that this practice must not be a millionaire's hobby.
Oh, he does?
Yes. He writes, "You need not suppose that I mean meals like Timons or paupers' huts or any other device which luxurious millionaires use to beguile the tedium of their lives. It must be a genuine, visceral confrontation with your own needs."
So no glamping.
No glamping. The billionaire sleeping on the floor for fun knows it's a game. To be effective, you must genuinely restrict your access to your safety nets. It's meant to break the psychological terror of losing your status, not to mimic the systemic realities of the destitute.
It's about resetting your dopamine baseline and breaking the terror of the worst-case scenario. Got it.
Another profound practice he gives us is what you could call the casket of time, drawn in from chapters 1 and 12. This is about restructuring how we view our entire lifespan.
In Chapter 12, while discussing the nature of old age, he proposes a radical temporal shift. Instead of visualizing your life as a long, continuous timeline stretching decades into the foggy future, he instructs Lucilius to treat every single day as a complete, enclosed life circle.
One day is equal to every day. Every day has its sunrise and its sunset, possessing all the necessary elements of a whole life.
The practice he prescribes is wild. He says to go to sleep every night and say aloud, "I have lived. The course which fortune set for me is finished."
You must genuinely treat the day as if it closed the series of your existence.
But the psychological friction doing that is immense. To go to sleep and actually trick your brain into letting go of tomorrow's to-do list, tomorrow's anxieties, tomorrow's hopes.
It is hard. But if you can manage it, the payoff the next morning is incredible. He says, when a man has said, "I have lived," every morning he rises, he receives a bonus.
A bonus day.
Imagine waking up not burdened by the obligations of a long future, but with the sheer euphoria of a condemned person who just received a surprise pardon. You get one more day. It fundamentally alters your baseline gratitude.
It forces you out of the future and violently into the present. And to help maintain that moral alignment throughout this bonus day, he offers a third practice in Chapter 11, choosing a witness.
This is such a clever psychological hack. He's discussing the blush of modesty, observing that even hardened, seasoned men will blush when caught off guard by certain situations. He pivots that physiological reaction into a method for moral regulation.
He actually quotes Epicurus here, advising Lucilius to cherish some man of high character and keep him ever before your eyes, living as if he were watching you and ordering all your actions as if he beheld them.
He suggests choosing someone with the unyielding integrity of a Cato, or perhaps a gentler spirit like Laelius. You mentally install them as a permanent observer of your inner life.
Because the human soul needs a standard by which to measure itself. We behave very differently when we know we are being observed.
Seneca explains that you can never straighten that which is crooked unless you use a ruler. The chosen witness acts as that objective ruler.
Think about how you act when you are totally alone in your car versus when your boss, or maybe your grandmother, is in the passenger seat.
Very different.
Very different. If someone cuts you off, the string of profanities you might unleash alone gets swallowed immediately if the witness is present. Choosing a witness creates a micro-pause between impulse and action. You ask, would Cato hit send on this petty, passive-aggressive email?
The answer is no, so you delete it.
Exactly. But implementing these practices, living entirely in the present, rehearsing poverty, constantly judging yourself against an internal witness, it means crashing headfirst into some deeply countercultural ideas.
Which brings us to the obstacles to growth within this text. Because Seneca doesn't just offer cozy, Instagram-friendly aphorisms, he demands things that make modern readers deeply uncomfortable.
The biggest stumbling block for me, the one that made me physically put the book down for a minute, was in chapter 5. It's his analysis of the link between hope and fear.
Oh, this is a tough one.
He quotes a Cato saying, "Cease to hope and you will cease to fear."
And you immediately felt friction there.
Massive friction. The idea of giving up hope sounds incredibly nihilistic and depressing. Our entire society, our economy, our medical research, our social justice movements, they're all fueled by hope for a better future.
Right, hope is the engine.
Hope is what gets a cancer patient through chemotherapy. If a friend tells you they've lost hope, you don't congratulate them on becoming a stoic, you call a therapist. How do we possibly live without hope?
It is a profound cultural disconnect, I agree. But if we examine the mechanics of Stoic psychology, the logic is unassailable. Seneca argues that hope and fear are inexorably chained together. He writes, "Just as the same chain fastens the prisoner and the soldier who guards him, so hope and fear, dissimilar as they are, keep step together. Fear follows hope."
Because both emotions demand that your mind abandon the present moment.
Precisely. Both hope and fear belong to a mind that is suspended in uncertainty. If you are hoping you get a promotion, your mind is simultaneously agonizing over the fear that you won't. You are living in a future that does not yet exist, sacrificing the only reality you possess.
He notes that memory recalls the tortures of fear, while foresight anticipates them. The present alone can make no man wretched.
To abandon hope in the Stoic sense is not to fall into despair or apathy. It is to detach your emotional well-being from uncontrollable future outcomes.
So you still take action.
Exactly. You still invent the medicine, you still fight for justice, but you do it because it is the virtuous right thing to do in the present moment, not because you are desperately hoping for a specific external result tomorrow. It is the achievement of total, unshakable presence.
It requires a level of mental discipline that is staggering.
It really does.
Another massive obstacle for the modern listener is his extreme stance on solitude in chapters 7 and 10. We already discussed his aversion to the mob, but in chapter 10, he pushes it to an uncomfortable extreme.
What does he say?
He says, avoid the many, avoid the few, avoid even the individual. He tells Lucilius, I do not know any person with whom I should prefer you to associate rather than yourself.
This directly assaults our modern fear of missing out, or FOMO, and our deeply held belief that constant connection is vital for mental health.
Yes, we are terrified of being alone.
And Seneca isn't naive. He acknowledges that solitude is highly dangerous for the unexamined mind. He warns that no thoughtless person ought to be left alone because they will inevitably plan folly, nurse their grievances, and stir their darkest passions.
But for the individual actively trying to cultivate wisdom, retreat into oneself is non-negotiable.
Right. Modern listeners will resist the advice to avoid even the individual because it is terrifying to trust yourself entirely. In a hyper-connected world, we constantly seek consensus. We crowdsource our decisions, our tastes, our politics.
We want a committee for everything.
Seneca is demanding that you become a sufficiently robust, virtuous person that you are actually safe in your own company.
And as we guide you through this material, we must exercise wisdom with discernment. Seneca is brilliant, but not every piece of ancient Stoic advice scales perfectly to the realities of the 21st century. We have to identify what we might need to leave in the past.
Let's talk about his view of the disposable body in chapters 14 and 17. Seneca exhibits a level of detachment from physical well-being that borders on the chilling.
Chilling is the right word. He argues that we are entrusted with the guardianship of the body, but we must never become slaves to it. We must be prepared to deliver it even to the flames when duty or virtue demands.
And in chapter 17, when discussing the extremes of poverty, he casually remarks, "If the utmost pinch of need arrives, he will quickly take leave of life and cease being a trouble to himself."
He is openly advocating for suicide as a practical exit strategy for hunger.
Yes.
I compare this to treating the human body like a cheap rental car. You're driving down the highway, the engine starts knocking, the radio breaks. Instead of fixing it, you just pull over, leave the keys in the ignition, and walk away into the woods.
That cavalier attitude toward ending one's life was somewhat normalized in elite Stoic circles of ancient Rome. Suicide was often romanticized as the ultimate assertion of rational freedom against the whims of a tyrant or the degradation of disease.
But modern trauma science, neurobiology, and psychology teach us that the mind and body are inextricably linked. You cannot neatly separate the rational soul from the physical vessel.
Absolutely. If you are starving or sleep-deprived or in chronic pain, your brain chemistry fundamentally alters. Your ability to reason rationally is compromised. We cannot be as dismissive of physical suffering as Seneca suggests, nor can we treat discarding the body as a simple logical pivot.
Another area requiring intense discernment is his extreme political withdrawal, detailed in chapter 14. He advises Lucilius to avoid provoking those in power, to hide from the mob, and essentially treats political engagement as a fool's errand.
He severely criticizes Marcus Cato, the ultimate Stoic hero, for trying to stop the civil war between Caesar and Pompey. Seneca says Cato's intervention was pointless because the Republic was already dead. It was just a dispute over which man would become the tyrant.
Seneca asks, "What does it concern you who conquers? The better man may win, but the winner is bound to be the worse man." He urges Lucilius to retreat into philosophy because it is a safe harbor that minds its own business.
We have to contextualize that, though. Under the tyrannical, unpredictable whims of emperors like Caligula or Nero, political withdrawal was often the only pragmatic survival strategy. Keeping your head down kept it attached to your neck.
True. But for a modern listener living in a democratic society with mechanisms for peaceful transition of power, this level of political apathy reads as a severe dereliction of civic duty.
Oh, for sure. If every wise, philosophically grounded person completely withdraws from the public square just to protect their own inner peace, they surrender society to the exact mobs and tyrants Seneca despises.
We must separate the immense personal value of internal stoicism from the societal danger of political apathy. You can cultivate a bulletproof inner citadel while still voting, organizing, and remaining civically engaged.
What makes Seneca such a compelling figure, though, is that he himself modeled this exact type of discernment. He didn't just swallow Stoic dogma blindly. He actively looked outside his own tradition for truth.
Which brings us to our final lens, comparative insight. And this might be the most delightful, surprising quirk of these early letters. Seneca is a towering figure of Stoicism. Yet throughout these first 21 chapters, specifically in chapters 2, 8, 11, and 21, he constantly quotes Epicurus.
The founder of the Epicurean school.
Yes, and to understand why this is shocking, we have to understand the intellectual landscape. Epicureanism was the great rival to Stoicism.
They had fundamentally opposing views on the universe. Epicureans believed the universe was composed of random atoms colliding without divine providence, and that the ultimate goal of life was pleasure defined as the absence of pain.
While Stoics believed the universe was ordered by a divine rational logos and that virtue was the only good, these were warring intellectual factions.
It's the equivalent of a diehard Yankees fan walking into the stadium wearing a Boston Red Sox jersey simply because he thinks the fabric is higher quality.
He doesn't care about the team colors, he cares about the utility of the shirt.
Exactly. Seneca ends almost every early letter by giving Lucilius a little gift or thought for the day, and time after time, the quote comes from Epicurus.
Seneca justifies this ideological trespassing beautifully in chapter 2. He tells Lucilius, "I am wont to cross over even into the enemy's camp, not as a deserter, but as a scout."
A scout. He views truth as universal property. He reiterates this in chapter 12. Any truth I maintain is my own property.
It doesn't matter whose mouth the truth comes out of. If it aligns with the laws of nature and reality, it belongs to you. In chapter 8, he quotes Epicurus saying, if you would enjoy real freedom, you must be the slave of philosophy.
And then Seneca expands the perimeter, pointing out that this wisdom isn't just in rival philosophy, it's in low-brow entertainment, too. He quotes the comic poet Lucilius, "What chance has made yours is not really yours."
This reveals a profound shared ancient wisdom that transcends the tribalism of the specific schools. Whether you are a Stoic, an Epicurean, or a playwright writing comedies for the masses, they all recognize that external gates of chance are not true possessions.
Seneca's willingness to raid the enemy camp demonstrates an intellectual humility that is desperately needed today. He was not trapped in an ideological silo.
I want to linger on this scout methodology because it feels like the absolute antidote to our current cultural polarization. Today, if an idea originates from the other side, the opposing political party, a rival corporation, a different academic discipline, our default setting is absolute rejection.
We assume that because the source is flawed or hostile in our eyes, the information they produce must be entirely poisonous.
But Seneca's approach dismantles that tribalism. A scout goes into enemy territory not to adopt the enemy's cause, but to gather intelligence, to map the landscape as it actually exists. He separates the utility of the idea from the identity of the speaker.
He offers a brilliant practical tool for this in chapter 21. He says, I think we ought to do in philosophy as they are wont to do in the Senate. When someone has made a motion, of which I approve to a certain extent, I ask him to make his motion in 2 parts, and I vote for the part which I approve.
Dividing the motion. It is a masterful way to engage with complex or controversial material. You don't have to swallow an ideology whole.
You can say, I completely reject the Epicurean view that the universe is random and lacks divine order, but I fully vote for their assertion that unbridled desires lead to misery. This is the very essence of critical thinking.
Imagine applying that to your social media feed or the daily news. We could read authors we previously dismissed or listen to perspectives we usually avoid. Just a scout for that one valuable nugget of insight, dividing the motion along the way.
And if we are gathering all these diverse insights, what is the ultimate purpose? Seneca ties it all together back in chapter 16. He says, philosophy is no trick to catch the public. It is a matter not of words, but of facts. It molds and constructs the soul.
The goal isn't just to be well-read or to win debates. It is to construct an internal fortress.
He addresses the massive existential dreads that keep us awake at night. He says, it doesn't matter whether fate binds us down by an inexorable law, whether God arranged everything, or whether blind chance drives human affairs without method. Philosophy ought to be our defense, regardless of the underlying cosmic mechanics.
That is deeply comforting, honestly. The underlying physics of the universe almost don't matter as much as your internal posture towards reality. Philosophy teaches you to obey the inevitable cheerfully and to endure chance defiantly.
Defying chance. That brings to mind his incredible advice in chapter 13 on how to stop suffering in imagination. This is the absolute affliction of the modern mind.
Oh, yes. He tells Lucilius, there are more things, Lucilius, likely to frighten us than there are to crush us. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality.
Consider how many times you've stayed up at night, heart pounding, adrenaline spiking, running through a catastrophic scenario at work or in a relationship that never actually materialized.
We exaggerate or imagine or anticipate sorrow. We torment ourselves before the crisis even arrives.
He uses this vivid imagery of soldiers in a camp. He says we blench and retreat just like soldiers who abandon their camp because of a dust cloud raised by stampeding cattle.
We see the dust on the horizon, our mind immediately projects an invading army, and we panic. We react to rumor and uncertainty as if it were established, concrete fact.
His practical remedy for this is incredibly grounded. He advises you to interrogate your own panic. Put the question voluntarily to yourself, am I tormented without sufficient reason? Weigh your hopes and fears carefully, and if the evidence is inconclusive, decide in your own favor.
Believe what you prefer.
If fear seems to be winning the argument, incline in the other direction anyway.
Give yourself the benefit of the doubt. Stop writing tragedies in your head before the curtain even goes up. He asks, what shall you gain by doing this? Time. We are right back to the ultimate resource. By refusing to suffer in imagination over a future evil, you buy back your time in the present.
Because, as he astutely observes, many unexpected things happen to divert the disaster you are so certain is coming. A fire opens a way to flight. The sword is miraculously checked at the victim's throat. Even bad fortune is fickle.
Even bad fortune is fickle. The storm might just pass you by. It all circles back to regaining absolute sovereignty over the only domain you actually rule your mind. In chapter 20, he says, bring yourself down to humble conditions from which you cannot be ejected.
If your happiness is tied to lofty, precarious conditions, wealth, status, the approval of the crowd, you can be ejected at any moment. But if you find contentment in what is simple and internal, you are untouchable.
He uses the philosopher Demetrius as the ultimate example. Seneca says he listens to Demetrius differently because he sees him reclining without even a cloak to cover him, without rugs to lie upon. Demetrius isn't just lecturing about the truth, he is a living witness to it.
He cannot be ejected from his happiness because he has methodically removed all external dependencies.
Seneca's entire project in these first 21 letters is a masterclass in aggressive prioritization. He is trying to convince Lucilius, and by extension you, to divest entirely from external dependencies and invest everything into your own character and your own time.
We have covered immense ground today. We've explored the radical idea of time as our only true possession, the countercultural practice of rehearsing poverty to inoculate ourselves against fear, the necessity of fleeing the toxic noise of the crowd, the psychological hack of selecting a moral witness, and the mental discipline required to treat each day as a complete life.
We've debated the merits of genuine friendship versus transactional networking and seen the brilliance of raiding the enemy camp for truth, while recognizing where ancient Stoicism falls short of modern reality.
It's an overwhelming amount of wisdom to digest. So remember Seneca's advice on reading. Don't just dip into this and move on to the next distraction. Select one thought to be thoroughly digested today.
That is the dividing line between making philosophy a transformative practice rather than just a parlor game. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final provocative challenge to mull over this week. It circles back to a single line from chapter 13 that we touched on earlier.
The fool, with all his other faults, has this also. He is always getting ready to live.
I challenge you to open up your digital calendar this week. Look at your to-do lists, your scheduled meetings, your weekend plans. Look closely at how you are spending that one precious, slippery commodity that nature has entrusted to you. How much of your time is spent actually living fully in the present moment, and how much is just frantic preparation for a someday that is absolutely not guaranteed? Are you endlessly laying down new foundations, waiting for the perfect financial or social conditions to finally begin living? The major portion of death has already passed. The years behind you belong to it. The landscape of the mind may be murky, but Seneca's prescription is blindingly clear. Lay hold of today's task.
That's the heart of this section. This is wisdom for the present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.